They say the biggest deals don't happen in boardrooms or over video calls, but beside fire pits deep in the mountains on yacht decks or around wine tables in winter lodges. That's where handshakes worth hundreds of millions are exchanged like a ritual. Isabella Hayes knew this well. After more than a decade leading Orion Nexus, the transportation technology company she had built from a small garage in San Jose, Isabella had grown accustomed to the fact that the biggest doors only opened for those who knew how to step through at exactly the right moment. So when the thick gold-embossed card was delivered into her hand, no email, no prior phone call, she wasn't surprised. It was an invitation to the North Summit Conference at the Lancaster family estate in Big Sky, Montana. A powerful dynasty with its name tied to real estate defense banking. And now they wanted to move into logistics. The deal waiting on the table, $920 million. Orion Nexus would bring artificial intelligence into Lancaster's aging transportation system. In return, she would gain a global launch pad. But one detail on the card made Isabella pause. Dress casual. Leave formalities at the door. Montana wasn't her territory. The way she spoke, the way she built things, was nothing like them. That evening, while packing, her assistant Maya hesitated. "Are you sure about this? These family-style summits? They want your brain, but they also want you to laugh at their jokes." Isabella just gave a slight smile. "They'll get the deal. Not me." On Thursday afternoon, the black SUV rolled through tall iron gates, opening up to a vast scene like a winter painting. The Lancaster estate sat nestled among misty pine forests with jagged snow-covered peaks in the distance. A helipad, tennis courts, luxurious log cabins. Everything appearing as a refined version of power passed down through generations. Her greeter was a young man in a Patagonia fleece jacket. "Ms. Hayes, welcome. We're honored to have you." "Just Isabella," she said, extending her hand. He hesitated for a beat, then smiled. "Grayson, I'll take your bags. The family's having lunch out on the deck." The stone-paved path led through a perfectly manicured garden, the scent of pine lingering in the cold air. As she stepped onto the wide wooden deck, Isabella saw them about a dozen people casually dressed, but all in designer labels, laughing over sparkling water and appetizer trays. At the head of the table sat Richard Lancaster, neatly combed silver hair, shoulders still broad like a retired athlete at 74. Beside him was Bradley, the eldest son, the man she'd been negotiating with for the past 3 months. The rest were wives, children, and a few close advisors. As Isabella approached, the conversation slowed. Not stopped completely, just like a breath being held. Bradley quickly stood and waved Isabella. "You made it. We were just talking about the future of automated rail transport. Please join us." Richard Lancaster rose, his eyes sweeping over her in a quick, silent assessment. "So this is the woman everyone's been talking about. Quite the reputation you have." "I hope it's a good one," Isabella replied evenly. "Oh, of course. We just didn't quite expect this." No one moved to pull out a chair for her. Isabella seated herself, her smile still intact. This wasn't her table, at least not yet. That evening, the Lancasters hosted a cocktail reception in a glass-walled lounge overlooking the mountains. Firelight flickered across the wooden ceiling, a string quartet played softly in the background, cheese boards, red wine. Everything exuded hospitality, but Isabella sensed something else. This was a social test wrapped in the guise of a welcome. Dina Lancaster, Richard's youngest daughter, approached, swirling her wine. "So, where did you actually grow up, South San Jose?" Isabella replied without blinking. Dina tilted her head, lips curving slightly. "And now you're here, negotiating nearly $1 billion with my family. That's incredible." The words "with my family" rang out like an invisible line in the sand. Isabella simply smiled. Hard work can travel far. Across the room, Bradley was speaking to Maya, Isabella's assistant, in the tone one might use for a personal maid. "Your boss must be tough. Did she grow up in a military family or something?" Maya blinked. "She's standing less than 2 meters away. You could ask her directly." Bradley chuckled as if it were just harmless banter. But Isabella heard every word. Less than an hour later, Trent, a cousin in his 30s, leaned against the billiards table, giving her a once-over. "Honestly, when Bradley said the CEO of Orion Nexus was you, I pictured someone else." Isabella tilted her head. "Someone how?" He laughed awkwardly. "Maybe older or a guy. Definitely not someone who could handle a balance sheet in high heels." Isabella gave a soft laugh, but her eyes didn't follow. "I hear that a lot, usually right before someone tries to lowball me." The room fell into another uncomfortable silence. Isabella noted it all. The next morning's schedule was skeet shooting and ATV rides through the forest. Isabella excused herself, saying she needed to handle investor calls. The guest office, an oak-paneled library with books arranged more for display than reading, was so quiet she could hear the wind against the windows. Near mid-afternoon, she returned to the main hall. Muddy boots from the returning group were scattered across the tile floor, laughter spilling from the kitchen. She was heading upstairs when a woman in a gray uniform, clipboard in hand, rushed over. "Oh, I'm so sorry," the woman said quickly. "Are you one of the new caterers?" Isabella stopped, meeting her gaze. "No, I'm not." The woman flushed. "I didn't mean..." "You assumed," Isabella cut in gently but firmly. "It's fine. Happens all the time." She walked on the click of her heels, echoing louder than before. That evening, the Lancasters held a small, cozy dinner ahead of tomorrow's strategy presentation. Isabella chose black slacks, a camel-colored blouse, low heels simple yet polished. As she entered the long dining room, lit with candles and linen napkins, Meredith Lancaster Richards' wife didn't look up, just extended her crystal glass. "Could you refresh the wine and bring more ice to this end?" Isabella turned, her expression calm, "Ma'am." Only then did Meredith glance up. Her face froze for a beat. "Oh, I thought you were staff." "I'm not," Isabella replied evenly. "I see. My mistake." The room went quiet for a few seconds. Bradley gave an awkward laugh. "Mom, this is the woman who might save our transport division." But the sting was already there. On the final night of the summit, the Lancasters called it family dinner, a tradition preserved for generations. There was no casual atmosphere now, only formality mixed with control. Candlelight glowed over the long oak table, handwritten place cards in brown ink. Isabella's seat was between Trent and Dina, across from Bradley, with Richard at the head. Maya was not invited. Meredith had asked directly. "She's staff, right?" Bradley, sounding slightly irritated, replied. "She's on Isabella's executive team." But no seat for Maya appeared. Isabella entered in a deep emerald wrap dress, hair swept into a sleek bun. She sat back straight, gaze calm, though it felt like walking into a lion's den in heels instead of armor. Over appetizers, Dina leaned in and whispered, "I admire how you've handled yourself this week. It's not easy being the only woman in the room." Isabella smiled. "I'm rarely just the only woman." Trent cut in from the other side. "But you've got to admit, it's kind of funny, right? You walking into a dynasty like ours like you're here to break traditions makes us look like dinosaurs." "I didn't walk in to look like anything," Isabella replied. "I came to bring value." Bradley grinned. "Exactly why we're excited. This deal is symbolic for our evolution." Isabella glanced around the table. "Let's hope the symbol doesn't get in the way of substance." A pause. Then Richard set down his glass, eyes locking on her. "I don't really get this trend of representation and diverse leadership. Back in the day, we just hired the best, no quotas, no multicolor marketing campaigns." He stopped letting the weight of his words land. "No offense," Richard added. Isabella folded her napkin, placing it on the table. "When someone says no offense, what they usually mean is they're hoping you'll swallow the insult to keep the peace." The table began to cool. Richard leaned back, swirling his wine as if he'd just spoken a universal truth. "I'm just being honest. These days, every company needs a little story to add color. A woman, a minority founder, that's smart marketing like marketing with melanin. Works great. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room." Dina looked away. Bradley clenched his jaw. Isabella met Richard's gaze, her voice low and clear. "What did you just say?" Richard shrugged. "I said it's a clever strategy. I respect the skill." She rose slowly, taking a USB from her coat pocket and placed it in front of Bradley. "My final offer." Bradley opened the file, brows furrowing. "You've removed the equity share," Isabella nodded. "And the revenue split." "Yes, that's the offer," Richard scoffed. "So you're walking after all this time?" Isabella clasped her hands calmly. "I walked in here with an open mind. You served me wine with contempt, mistook me for staff, spoke about me as if I weren't in the room, and now tell me my achievements are just a marketing ploy." Richard lifted his chin. "You're letting your ego get in the way of $920 million. Isabella leaned slightly forward, eyes never leaving his no. "I'm letting my standards get in the way of giving you access to what I built." She turned, walking slowly toward the door. "You think you still hold all the power, but the world has changed. You just haven't noticed." The door closed behind her, leaving the table heavy in silence. Back in her room, Isabella set the small suitcase beside the desk, the zipper still open. The deal documents, proposal draft, and press release outline sat neatly stacked. She sat down, opened her phone, and replied to a few emails, as if tonight were just another workday. A knock at the door. Maya stepped in, arms folded. "They're in chaos downstairs. I heard Bradley calling the lawyer. His voice was panicked." Isabella didn't look up. "Good. They should be. They said they didn't think you'd actually walk away." Isabella set the phone down, meeting her gaze. "Because women like me rarely get that chance. At least, not in rooms like this." They sat in silence for a few seconds. It wasn't pride. It wasn't revenge. It was a deep, heavy stillness, born from choosing herself over a seat that had already been set. Another knock. Bradley stood in the doorway, looking tired. "I know my father went too far. I tried to stop him. We can reframe the messaging, redirect the PR. You don't have to leave." Isabella stayed by the door, not inviting him in. "Reframe it for what, Bradley? To tell the story that I was humiliated but stayed for the check." He hesitated. "That's not staying, that's being smart." "No. Being smart is knowing that tying my legacy to a name that openly disrespected me in front of the entire room will cost me more than $920 million. It will cost me the trust of people who are watching, hoping that dignity still means something at the top." She shook her head slightly. "I've already left Bradley." The next afternoon, the Montana sky was a solid gray wind, whipping hard against the rows of motionless pines. The entire estate felt like it was holding its breath. Isabella descended the staircase, rolling her suitcase lightly, Maya following close behind. No goodbyes, no hands reaching to stop her, only the sound of wheels on polished wood and the averted gazes of a few staff members, people who knew exactly what had happened the night before. By the fireplace in the main hall, Richard stood with his back turned, his voice low but loud enough for the room to hear. "Give them too much space and they'll think they're in charge." Trent stayed silent. Dina set her teacup down, looking straight at him. "Or maybe she never needed us as much as we thought." The black SUV wound its way down the twisting drive flanked by towering trees. At the helipad, Maya opened the door for Isabella to step onto the private jet. The cabin air was warmer, but the silence was just as dense. Maya crossed her arms and leaned back in her seat. So, now what Isabella looked out the window, watching the mountains shrink. Now we tell the story our way. The jet lifted off, slicing into the gray clouds. No one in the cabin said another word. But on the ground, the story had already taken on a life of its own without a single press release. Just hours later, headlines began appearing on financial news sites. Female CEO walks away from $920 million. Deal. After insult at closed-door conference, Orion Nexus founder exits negotiations. Logistics industry takes notice. And this was only the beginning. Within a single night, the name Isabella Hayes dominated headlines. Major outlets, business forums, social media, they all echoed the same narrative. Female CEO rejects $920 million to protect her dignity. Her actions achieved what dozens of DEI committees could not. Here's why we don't just want a seat in the room, we want to build the room. The striking part, Isabella hadn't made a single official statement. That silence only fueled the frenzy. People wanted to know why, to hear her own words, and with each passing hour more versions of the story emerged. Bradley tried to put out the fire with vague remarks about cultural differences and strategic alignment, but it only made things worse. It was obvious the Lancaster family was scrambling. When Isabella finally agreed to an interview, it wasn't with a major network or glossy magazine. She chose a small podcast run by a Black-owned business in Baltimore. No studio lights, no stage, just her, a microphone, and a wooden kitchen table. "I didn't walk away from the deal," she said slowly. "I walked away from the disrespect." She paused. People often mistake silence for weakness. But silence can also be a choice, a boundary, a refusal to dignify something that never deserved to be said in the first place. The host asked, "What would you say to a young woman who thinks she has to endure it to succeed?" Isabella didn't hesitate. You don't climb to the top just to sit next to people who laugh at you behind closed doors. You climb to change. Who's building the ladder? A week later, while the story still trended online, Orion Nexus released a short statement. "We are officially entering a strategic alliance with a consortium of minority-owned transportation and manufacturing companies based in Arizona and Oregon." They weren't household names. They didn't have centuries-old legacies or mountaintop estates. But they were innovative, fast-growing, and most importantly, built on mutual respect. Industry analysts were cautious at first, but just 3 days later, Orion Nexus stock jumped 14%. Investors called it a bold but savvy move, and the startup community hailed it as proof that you don't always need the giants to break through. Isabella didn't throw a celebration. She still showed up at headquarters in San Jose as usual, walking the halls, stopping to watch engineering teams huddled around whiteboards and drone delivery prototypes. No legacy was built on checks alone, it was built on people and ideas. Maya caught up to her at the conference room door. "The organizers of next quarter's Industry Summit want you as their keynote speaker. The slot's yours if you want it." Isabella paused. "Tell them I'll think about it." Maya raised a brow. "You're not worried people are still talking about you walking out?" A faint smile. "No, I'm thinking about the people who never realized. They could do the same." That evening, Isabella stood by her office window, the last light of day sliding across San Jose's glass towers. She held a cup of tea gone cold, but her mind was sharper than ever. She thought about all the rooms she'd walked into, where laughter paused just long enough to weigh a person's worth, where scrutiny hid under layers of politeness, and where no offense was simply a test to see how much she would endure. She had left. Not because she couldn't sign a number, but because she knew some things once traded could never be reclaimed, like the respect you hold for yourself. That night during an online session with her young mentees, one asked, "If we were in that situation, what would you tell us to do?" Isabella looked straight at the screen, her voice slow but firm. If you're in a space where your worth is constantly questioned, where you're accepted but never respected, ask yourself, is that check worth the cost? Because sometimes the boldest move you can make is to stand up and walk away from the table. The screen was silent for a few seconds. Then the young faces began to nod, not because they'd heard a clever quote, but because they'd just seen a living example of it. 3 weeks after leaving the Lancaster estate, the annual Logistics Industry Conference opened in New York. The grand hall glittered, packed with hundreds of power players, cameras sweeping the room. The program listed keynote speaker Richard Lancaster, Chairman Lancaster Group. But when the clock struck 9, Huzuro murmurs spread. On the massive LED screen, it wasn't Richard's face, it was Isabella's. In a steady voice, she began, "3 weeks ago, I walked away from a $920 million negotiation. Not because I couldn't deliver, but because that table didn't deserve me." The hall fell silent. Light caught in her eyes, not angry, not bitter, only absolute certainty. Power isn't about where you're invited to sit. True power is having the courage to stand up and let that door close behind you, because you know that outside you can build an entirely new house. On the 3rd row, Richard Lancaster sat frozen, his hand gripping the armrest. Cameras caught the exact moment his gaze faltered, a moment the entire industry would remember. Isabella paused, letting the silence swallow the room, then smiled. "And for those who still think I lost an opportunity, I didn't lose anything. They lost the opportunity to have me." Applause erupted, sustained, thunderous, so much that the moderator had to wait. Some stood not out of courtesy, but because they'd just witnessed someone flip the board right before their eyes. As Isabella walked off stage, the hall still echoed with clapping. And somewhere in each person's mind a question took root. If it were me, would I have the courage to stand up like she did,